The curious case of Keita. On the eve of the opening of the transfer window, we're here with the agenda on Blood Red to debate Naby Keitas' Liverpool future. 2 years out from the end of his Liverpool contract, could he move on this summer, or how do the Reds find a way of unlocking the club's third most expensive signing of all time? I'm Guy Clarke, our Blood Red writer. Matt Addison is here with me. And to start with, Matt, I suppose, are we reaching, or are we already at a stick or twist crossroads with Naby Keita?
I think we are. I think we've approached it this summer. He's not one of the names that we understand that the Echo is on that list of potentially getting a new contract anytime soon. So I think there's other priorities in terms of keeping players at Liverpool. And when you think that he's only got 2 years left on his contract, you do wonder which way do Liverpool go next with this. I mean, there is the possibility, of course, that they don't give him a new contract, but they do keep him for the next 2 years and let him go on a free transfer potentially. But as you say, the third most expensive signing of all time, £52.75 million it was that they paid for him to get him out of Leipzig. It would kind of feel a little bit of a strange one to let that happen. But we know that the reasons why it's not quite worked for him up to this point. But I think there's always that question with Naby Keita of if it clicks and if you keep him and if things go well, he could become a brilliant player. I think he is a perfect midfielder for Jurgen Klopp. And I suppose that's the question, isn't it? Do you keep him even though the evidence isn't there that he can get on the pitch? Or do you let him go and take the risk that possibly if he moves away and next season his injury troubles do just click and he does get back to being the player that he was at Leipzig, suddenly then Liverpool would regret that. So I think it's really in the balance. But as you say, we are very much approaching now a time where Liverpool have to make a decision one way or the other. To me, I think they have to be ruthless this summer, but you can't be ruthless with every player that's on the fringes. You have to keep some of them. And that's the kind of debate that I think will be going on internally at Liverpool now.
And he of course, arrived with so much fanfare because of the wait for him to become a Liverpool player. But 3 years into his Liverpool career, and so often when we debate and talk about Naby Keita, we're talking about him not being involved or fantasizing over what he could offer and could deliver. He's 26 now. I suppose over those last 3 years now, we've slowly but surely actually seen a depreciation not only in his value, but maybe even in his talents. And you say there, if his injury record can improve, we know what he can offer. I'd sort of question maybe if that player is still in there and actually that Liverpool are hanging on to a player here in thinking he's got this ability within. Because, for example, he came in the Fulham game, didn't he, during Liverpool's run of poor results, and it was hoped this could be the game, this could be the player to unlock stubborn defences. And even in that game, there was precious little that was offered up.
Yeah, well, it was the same for Real Madrid as well. He came in for that one. Jurgen Klopp explained afterwards that he'd been world-class in training. He'd been doing all of the right things, everything that Klopp and his coaching staff wanted. But then you put him into that match scenario and it just didn't quite happen for him. So it is a really strange one. I mean, the talent is very much there. But I think it's one of those that you won't quite really understand the player that he is until he plays a full season, or if he ever can play a full season and you get to see him get into rhythm, get into form, and maybe play himself into being the player that he once was. I mean, it's a really strange one in terms of the injuries. I mean, at Leipzig, he didn't really have too many problems. He was playing regularly. It was obviously still a very fast, intense league, the Bundesliga. It's not hugely different to the Premier League. I think the Premier League is another step up physically, but not enough that you would think that these injuries would be caused by that. So it's a real conundrum to work out why it is. I mean, we've seen plenty of players move from Germany to England before and not have this problem. It's not like there's sort of a precedent for that being the case. And you only have to look at the number of minutes that he's played. I mean, he played under 700 minutes last season for Liverpool in all. He only started 9 matches in the entirety of the season. And I mean, you only have to compare him to Gini Wijnaldum, who is probably a player that Keita himself would look at and think, well, he's moved on. Maybe I can be the replacement. I mean, Wijnaldum played more than 3,600 minutes for each of the last 4 seasons for Liverpool. So the numbers just don't even compare between them in terms of getting them on the pitch. But I think the interesting thing is that if you actually look at the small sample size, admittedly, of Keita, but when he is on the pitch, his actual statistics in terms of ball progression, winning the ball back, his pressing, all of those things are better than Gini Wijnaldum. But of course, that's just completely irrelevant. If you can't get him on the pitch, it just doesn't really matter.
Yeah, Jurgen Klopp does often turn to him at big times, as you say. the Real Madrid game away in the Champions League. In fact, since getting dragged off in that game before half-time, he's not featured for Liverpool. Wasn't even in the squad for any of the last 5 Premier League matches of the season either. And when you look at that list of players that Liverpool have signed and spent big money on, certainly since FSG came into the club, and that really being when Liverpool have unlocked any sort of transfer war chests they may have had. But the only 2 more expensive players have been Virgil van Dijk and Alisson Becker. In and around Naby Keita, then you've got Diogo Jota, who of course arrived last season and already has started repaying his fee from Wolverhampton Wanderers, Mohamed Salah and Fabinho as well. It is fair, I suppose, to say that there was a lot of expectation, but it has ultimately also been a frustrating time, both for the player and supporters. As you say, people keen to get behind Naby Keita when he does get a run of games, but that frustration of not quite being able to count on him enough to be out there.
Yeah, I think it's still correct that he's not started more than 3 Premier League games in a row for Liverpool in his entire career. And as you say, to pay that sort of money, Liverpool must have been convinced that he was, a game-changing player. We've seen sort of Van Dijk described as a transformational signing, and I think that was the idea with Naby Keita, obviously further up the pitch. Does everything that you need from a Jurgen Klopp midfielder. He's got that creativity and flair, but he's got that defensive side as well. And that's what Liverpool fans were sold, really, during those 12 months that they had to wait to see him. They've obviously seen on YouTube, they saw, highlights and things like that of him playing in Germany. And that's what you saw. You saw a player who was able to carry the ball, who was able to play through balls. And we have seen it at times at Liverpool, but that's the frustration, is that that his ceiling is incredibly high. He is a perfect player to play in this Liverpool team the way that Jurgen Klopp wants to play. And I think the idea probably would have been for him to come in and move Gini Wijnaldum out of the team when he came in. Obviously, that could happen this summer, but it's just not happened for him over the last 3 seasons that he's been here. And I think that's it, isn't it? It's a long enough sample size now to think that this isn't going to change. If you said to me that, he only started, 9-10 games next season, that wouldn't exactly be a huge surprise. So it's a really tough quandary, I think, for Liverpool to weigh up, because you look at it and he's got everything you need. He's got all of the talent, but as I said before, there's just not really any point if you can't get him on the pitch regularly. Even if you said once a week, he doesn't have to start every single game. Even if you could guarantee, that he could start 2 or 3 games a month, that would be, a really worthwhile thing to keep him at the club. But you just can't afford to do that. I don't think, particularly with Wijnaldum moving on. You look at the other players, Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain. Okay, he's not been injured, but he's not really been trusted, particularly by Jurgen Klopp over the last couple of seasons. Xherdan Shaqiri's played in midfield at times. He could well move on. There's interest, I think, from Italy at the moment in him. There's just sort of a few question marks in there. And okay, you can maybe afford to carry 1 or 2 players in that position, but when you've got 3 or 4 players who either will move on or possibly wouldn't be able to play particularly often next year, I think that's a real concern in terms of replacing Wijnaldum, because that's the trait, isn't it, that you need from whoever comes in, whether it's a like for like, whether it's somebody slightly different. The one thing that you do have to have is somebody that's going to come in and be able to play 50 games, because essentially that's what Gini Wijnaldum has done for the last 2 or 3 seasons consecutively.
Yeah, he was sort of, I suppose, the dream signing, wasn't he, for Liverpool, Naby Keita? He was a pressing monster in the midfield. He was creative. He could get around the pitch as well. But unfortunately, the engine to be the engine for Liverpool, quite frankly, hasn't quite been up to it and has broken down on a number of occasions. And so that leads us then to 2 years on from the end of his contract then, or 2 years out from the end of his contract, I should say. The fact that, I suppose, this summer, Liverpool would listen to offers. It wouldn't just be a straight no to anything that came their way, albeit, of course, they've got a near on £53 million fee to try and recoup somehow. I'm sure they're not going to try and get the full fee back, but say even a £30 million bid, Matt, it would have to be considered, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I'd say even less than that, to be honest. I think if you got half of the 52 that you paid for him, I think that would be a decent fee when you look at his contract situation, the amount of minutes that he's played. I mean, there has been a few links with him. I know Atletico Madrid have been linked with him, and Saul Niguez could move on from there, possibly. Is there a move there? Possibly. Leicester City have been linked with him as well, but I think they've just signed Boubakary Soumaré from Lille. Would you think that they go for another central midfielder? Probably not. I mean, that's the thing. I think as much as we can sit here and say, well, 25, 30 million, yeah, 100%, I would take that, I think. who is going to put that money down on him? Who's going to put the money forward? Because as much as we know he's a talented player, you have to imagine that wherever he goes next, he'd have the same sort of injury problems as what he's had. So, yeah, again, it's a tough one. I think if the price was right for Liverpool, certainly they would think about it. But it's just a case of trying to find really a team that would be capable and willing of putting that sort of money down. I think possibly one way around it would be a kind of swap deal type thing. I mean, we don't see that a huge amount, but I know last summer when we were in the office, or before last summer, wasn't it? We had a sort of conversation. Yeah, when Liverpool were sort of starting to be linked with Timo Werner, somebody in the office said, well, what do you think? Would you sort of put Naby Keita in a deal for Timo Werner? And I kind of thought, well, no, not really, because, I'm still sort of hopeful that obviously Keita could do something. I thought Liverpool at that time, if they were to get Timo Werner, they'd be able to pay that transfer fee. Obviously, that didn't quite happen, and he's obviously moved to Chelsea. But at the time, everyone was excited about Timo Werner. But even then, I wouldn't have sacrificed Naby Keita to bring him in. So, yeah, a year on, it's just sort of another season that's been similar to his first two. He's now had 3 consecutive ones where he's not really played a great deal. Yeah, I think you'd struggle to find anybody willing to put 25 million down for him. But is there a swap deal in there? Possibly. Maybe you could tempt someone on that sort of grounds. But again, obviously that's a very rare thing to do in the transfer market, and it would have to be a club where Liverpool were keen on a particular player, and obviously that club would then have to be keen on Naby Keita. A lot of things would have to fall into place for that to be the case.
Yeah, a lot of ifs, isn't there, involved in that, and a lot of different permutations that would all have to line up and fit for both parties. But I suppose then for Liverpool, it's maybe the first real time under Michael Edwards' role in that sporting director position that they found themselves in this kind of position, that they've picked a player out on the data, they've watched him, they've seen everything that he had to offer was ideal for Liverpool. Unfortunately, the mechanics of it, obviously these aren't robots, they are human beings, and unfortunately it hasn't quite worked out for him. But they've been brave before in the transfer market and sold players, maybe against popular opinion. This time it might be against their model of wanting to turn a profit on players, but it may well be the necessity to evolve and move the squad on.
Yeah, to be honest, I wouldn't necessarily even say that they've got it wrong on Keita. I think they've got it right. They just couldn't have foreseen that the injuries would take place. I think if he wasn't injury prone and he wasn't always on the treatment table, then Liverpool would have a player that was worth the 52 million that they spent on him. I don't think they identified the wrong player, because there wasn't really any evidence that he would be quite as injury prone as what he has been. So that's the strange thing. And yeah, as much as we sort of praise Liverpool's recruitment and that sort of thing, there are certain things that you just can't predict. And I don't think, this was something that anybody would have seen coming. I think when Liverpool moved for him, there was other teams interested in him as well. Liverpool obviously got to the front of the queue. They used their sort of contacts within the Red Bull group and stuff like that to get on top of this and sign this player. And everyone was rightly excited about it. But yeah, we've said it 1 or 2 times. If you can't get him on the pitch, there's just no point. But I don't think it was Liverpool's fault necessarily that they couldn't have foreseen that, because I don't think anybody could. I think I'm right in saying at Leipzig, he was playing sort of 30 plus games in the league each season. He wasn't injury prone. He didn't pick up these injuries. And that's the sort of thing that you'll look back on and wonder quite what's happened, whether it's, just a change of intensity, a change in his training program, whatever it is. They've not been able to get to the bottom of it so far, and it's just a real strange one. It could just be, unfortunate. It could be unlucky. There could be something more underlying that we don't know about that's forcing these injuries. But whichever way it is, I think it would be pretty harsh to criticise Michael Edwards and the recruitment staff, because I think they got the right player. It's just not happened, unfortunately.
Yeah, circumstances has played against them. In terms of it, then 2 years away from the expiry of his new contract, I suppose he wouldn't command maybe the terms that he's on right now, having arrived as the third most expensive signing in the club's history. But do Liverpool, I suppose it is, we said at the top, they're at a crossroads. It is maybe a bit of a gamble. Try and see if one last time, a fourth season, he can get it right, and all of a sudden you do unlock the player that we all know is within. Or do they try and claw back what fee they can and find maybe a younger player to fit into that midfield?
I think for me, it would come down to what offers were on the table. I think if you got 25 plus million on the table, I think you take it. If you get less than that, probably you just leave it another season, see how things are, see if that is a change of fortune or sort of certainly in terms of the injuries and that sort of thing. If they were to subside over the next 12 months, then give him those 12 months essentially to prove himself, and you can offer new terms next summer if you need to. So I think for me, it purely comes down to if a big enough offer, a tempting enough offer comes in, 100% you take it. But if not, I wouldn't be in a rush to sell him any cheaper than 25 million. I think that would be a fair price, a fair sort of gamble for someone somewhere to take. But otherwise it's a case of bringing in less money and having to replace him, because as much as he's obviously not played a huge amount, you would still have to have that extra body come in. Obviously, having Gini Wijnaldum departed as well, I think you would need certainly one player who would play every week to come in if both of them were to leave in one summer. So, yeah, I think it would be one of those that I don't think Liverpool are desperate. I don't think Liverpool should be desperate to get rid of him just yet. That could happen next summer with a year left on his contract. Then you would accept a cut price move. But I think for this summer, unless a pretty decent offer comes in, I'd be tempted just to keep him, let him do what he's been doing and just say to him, look, you've got 12 months. And if you don't do anything in the next 12 months, if it doesn't quite work for you, then unfortunately we're going to have to part ways. But I think he's young enough that you can give him that extra 12 months. And I think there's going to be enough exits this summer, enough upheaval in the squad that you probably don't want to add another unnecessary name to that list.
Yeah, well, of course, the transfer window does open tomorrow. Of course, Liverpool having already wrapped up a deal for Ibrahima Konate from RB Leipzig. Who else will be coming in? Who will be going? Will Naby Keita be one of those to be heading for the exit door at Anfield? We will have to wait and see. But don't forget, you will be able to follow it all across on the Liverpool Echo website as well as here on Blood Red. I've been Guy Clarke, Matt Addison alongside me. Thanks for joining us here on The Agenda. Until next time, it's bye for now.